Hello, I'm Suzanne Collins with NFIB Pennsylvania. I'd like to first thank our sponsors, McNeese, Wallace, and Nurick. They're a law firm that has offices all over Pennsylvania, and also Capital Blue Cross. We have today our presenters, and I thank them so much for being here. The first is Kelly Kaufman. She's an attorney with McNeese, Wallace, and Nurick. And we also have Lisa McCloskey, an RN, and she is a lactation specialist with the Pennsylvania Breastfeeding Coalition. Lisa, let's let you start, and then very shortly you'll be hearing about all of the legal requirements of small business from Kelly. Go ahead, Lisa.
Thank you, Suzanne. I'm so pleased to be here. Many women joined the workforce during World War II, and this poster that we're familiar with was produced by Westinghouse, and it was a call to action for women to do their part to help their country and join the workforce. On January 20th, 2011, nearly 5 years ago to this very day, Dr. Regina Benjamin, the Surgeon General of the United States, issued the Surgeon General's call to action to support breastfeeding. One of the specific steps to reduce barriers to breastfeeding is to establish high-quality lactation support programs in the workplace. Employment is the norm for women of childbearing age, yet working mothers choosing to breastfeed are at risk for not meeting their breastfeeding goals. I'm excited to show you how breastfeeding and working is not only possible, it's easy and inexpensive to do, and it's good for business. For almost all infants, breast milk is the very best nutrition, and breastfeeding protects mothers and babies from illness. Breast milk is amazing because it adapts over time to meet the changing needs of a growing child. For instance, a mother delivering a preterm baby will make preterm breast milk. Babies who receive their own mother's milk are healthier and experience fewer infections and hospitalizations. And women who breastfeed lower their risk of some cancers, cardiovascular diseases, and diabetes compared with women who do not breastfeed. In Pennsylvania, more than 2/3 of mothers begin breastfeeding, yet less than half still breastfeed at 6 months. And only 1 in 7 meet the health requirements of every medical organization for exclusive breastfeeding in that time frame. Our state breastfeeding rates fall below the national average, and one of the main reasons for the drop-off in breastfeeding rates is return to work and a lack of break time and a private place to pump. As business owners, you have a powerful role in creating a supportive environment to improve breastfeeding success. Support of nursing mothers is a valuable and affordable employee benefit, yielding a 3-to-1 return on investment. Fewer doctor visits, prescriptions, and hospitalizations not only affect healthcare costs, bringing them down, but it also affects employee attendance. When babies are healthier, both mother and fathers have fewer absences to stay home to care for sick children. The retention rate for employees of companies with lactation support programs is 94% as compared to the national average of 59%. This family-friendly benefit allows your employees to show up in mind and body, and your company may enjoy increased productivity and loyalty as a result. Support of breastfeeding employees improves your image, attracting both customers and future talent as your business grows. Before I tell you about the few simple things that your employees need, I'd like to ask Kelly Kaufman, an employment attorney, to tell you about the laws protecting nursing mothers.
Well, thank you, Lisa. I'm going to start by giving you the law that is most on point with respect to employers' obligations for nursing mothers in the workplace. In 2010, we had the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, the healthcare reform law, come into effect. And as part of that law, there was an amendment to the Federal Fair Labor Standards Act. That amendment added the obligation for all employers covered by the FLSA to require that they provide unpaid breaks for nursing mothers to express breast milk during the workday. The FLSA is very broadly applicable. It applies to employers with 1 or more employees. I'll get into the specific requirements that came along with this amendment, but in terms of coverage, there is an exception for small employers. It's a narrow exception. That exception is for employers with under 50 employees, and that is across all work sites. Those employers are not required to provide the breaks that we're going to talk about if the obligation to do so would cause an undue hardship on the employer. For example, it would cause the employer significant difficulty or expense when you compare that with the size of the employer, the financial resources of the employer, or otherwise the nature and structure of the employer's business. Now, undue hardship is usually a pretty hard burden for an employer to overcome. So you really would want to look very critically about what might be necessary to comply with this unpaid break requirement and the hardship that it would cause on your business if you were looking to take advantage of this exception and want it to hold up in the event of a legal challenge. Very generally speaking, this unpaid break requirement applies only to your non-exempt employees. That means it applies only to those employees who are not exempt from the overtime requirements. So these are, for example, your hourly employees who are entitled to receive time and a half for hours worked over 40 in the work week. All non-exempt employees are entitled to these unpaid breaks under this amendment to the FLSA. And the law, generally speaking, prohibits retaliation against any employee who exercises their rights under this law. Now, in the next slide, we're going to talk about the specific requirements that come along with this unpaid break obligation. So for those non-exempt employees, the employer has to provide a, quote, reasonable break time to express breast milk each time the employee has the need to do so. And that's an obligation that applies for up to 1 full year after the birth of the child. Now, one of the things to keep in mind here is there's never any prohibition on employers from being more generous than the law requires. But this is the floor, and this is the minimum obligation. So what does it mean to provide a reasonable break as frequently as the employee has the need? Reasonable is a little bit of a squishy term. The need is going to vary from individual to individual. So there is no bright and fast rule for what reasonable is going to look like or how long the break may need to be. There is the acknowledgement by the Federal Department of Labor that those things are likely to vary. So generally speaking, the EEOC has issued some guidance. We'll talk about that in a moment. They've indicated 2 to 3 times a day is probably at least likely for the need for a mother to express breast milk. And again, the times may vary. I wouldn't expect that they would be an hour each time, but maybe a 15-minute break very likely would be reasonable. The employer also has to provide a private location where the nursing mother can express breast milk, and it absolutely cannot be a bathroom. So it has to be some other location that can be made available. It doesn't have to be dedicated space solely for this use, but it has to be available when the nursing mother has the need to use it, and it can be shielded from view and free from intrusion. It has to be private, and that makes sense. I think everyone would understand that. So you want a location where you can close and lock the door so someone can't inadvertently walk in while the nursing mother is expressing breast milk. Or the blinds can be closed so that people outside can't see into windows, again, while the mother is expressing breast milk. So it has to be a private location that is not a bathroom that meets those requirements. One of the things to keep in mind with respect to this break obligation for non-exempt nursing mothers is that it does not have to be a paid break. This is an unpaid break obligation with 2 caveats. One, if you otherwise provide your employees with paid breaks, maybe you provide a 15-minute paid break in the morning and a 15-minute paid break in the afternoon for employees working full-time, an 8-hour day. If you do that and the nursing mother uses one of those breaks to express breast milk, then the break still has to be paid consistent with your policy. If the nursing mother needs to take time to express milk other than one of those breaks, then it does not have to be paid unless you have a policy of paying it or the employee is not free from all work during the break. The general principle under the FLSA with respect to your non-exempt employees is that in order for time to be unpaid, the employee has to be completely relieved of all duties. The Department of Labor has very well established that breaks of 20 minutes or less aren't going to be long enough for employees to be completely relieved of all duties, so those breaks typically have to be paid. This is a small exception where if it is a break outside of your standard break period, if you choose to provide it, you do not have to pay the nursing mother for this break. Okay? If, however, the break's interrupted for work reasons, you're going to have to make sure that they get paid accordingly. All right, there are other laws that implicate or are implicated by pregnancy and by post-pregnancy, pre-pregnancy, and other considerations. The leader of the pack is the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978, the PDA. It's actually an act that modified Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. It basically adds pregnancy as part of gender-based discrimination. Under the PDA, employers cannot discriminate against an individual because of pregnancy, because of childbirth, or related medical conditions. Now, the principle of the PDA is that employers must treat pregnant applicants and pregnant employees equal to non-pregnant applicants and employees. It means employers cannot treat them less favorably than similarly situated non-pregnant applicants or employees. It's not an obligation under that law to treat them more favorably. You just can't discriminate against them and treat them less favorably. And this applies to all areas of the universe of employment-related actions, from hiring to promotion and other benefits during employment, as well as discharge and all other terms and conditions that flow from the employment relationship. Now, in the past couple of years, the Federal Equal Employment Opportunity Commission has updated their pregnancy discrimination-related guidance. They have taken a very thorough viewpoint of employers' obligations under the PDA, and they have issued basically their perspective on the way that employers should be handling pregnancy, childbirth, and related conditions in the workplace. A small sidebar is that there is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and there are often state equivalent laws like our Pennsylvania Human Relations Act that prohibit discrimination on the basis of disability. Pregnancy itself, the condition of being pregnant, is not a disability under the law, but conditions stemming from pregnancy can be. So employers have to keep that in the back of their head when pregnancy-related, childbirth-related issues come into the workplace, and perhaps you learn that an employee believes they may need some assistance or something stemming from their pregnancy, childbirth, or a related condition. You want to make sure you're doing your due diligence and you understand your legal obligations under the many laws that can apply. With respect to the EEOC and their recent enforcement guidance, this is informal agency guidance. It is not a federal regulation. It is not federal law, but this is how the agency is going to interpret employers' obligations. They have been very thorough in addressing many areas relating to, again, pregnancy, childbirth, relations, including anticipated pregnancy, having been pregnant in the past, and the like. And the guidance is pretty long. Lactation-related needs do appear in this guidance, and what the EEOC says about that is that because lactation is a medical condition that relates to pregnancy, an employer can't discriminate against an employee because of her breastfeeding schedule. That basically means that if you allow non-lactating employees who have a similar situation, they have a non-incapacitating condition for which the employer allows them to take time off or modify their schedule to attend appointments or something like that, so too must the employer allow the lactating employee to modify their schedule or to have time off for appointments to address their lactation-related needs. So the EEOC very squarely has taken the position that employers need to keep this in mind when we're looking at treating pregnant employees equally to non-pregnant employees. There is a very handy little fact sheet for small businesses, and there's detailed information for all employers up on the EEOC's website. That's on your slide. It's worth taking a look at and familiarizing yourself with going forward. With respect to Pennsylvania itself, our state does not have a specific breastfeeding-related law applicable to your employees into the workplace. The state generally does have the Freedom to Breastfeed Act, which was signed into law by Governor Rendell back in 2007, and that law permits mothers to nurse their children in public. And it provides that breastfeeding cannot be considered a nuisance, indecent exposure, or sexual conduct or obscenity under any of the criminal laws or other laws. So that law is out there, but it is not specific to the workplace. There are efforts at the legislative level to pass a state law that provides protections in the workplace, and certainly other states do have laws that provide protections in the workplace. At the moment, Pennsylvania is just not one of them. And if Pennsylvania were to pass a law addressing breastfeeding in the workplace, and that law is more generous or more protective than the federal law, then employers also will need to make sure that they are complying with that state law. Right now, we've got a House bill percolating. It's the Workplace Accommodations for Nursing Mothers Act, but it is still very early in the legislative process, so that is a stay tuned. But generally speaking, this is kind of your very brief snapshot of the legal environment with respect to the issue of nursing mothers and breastfeeding in the workplace. Lisa?
Okay, and now back to Lisa. If you could continue, I understand that there are certain needs, and you're going to tell us more about that on behalf of a breastfeeding mother at work.
Right, and I'll give you some examples of businesses that have accommodated mothers. So the needs of breastfeeding employees are very few, and we have the list right here. A common misconception is that this is all about the rooms, when in fact the time and the support is really important, and of course we are going to need a private space. There are easy steps to implementing an employee lactation program, and you don't need to figure it out yourself. If you have an employee and you want to have some solutions, I have a website here that you can click on, and you're going to get Employer Solutions. That's a resource from the Department of Health and Human Services, and the business case for breastfeeding is a turnkey program that includes policies, timelines, everything that you could possibly need to implement a program. And there are people, that lactation consultants trained around the state, that can be a resource for you. So you can look to your local breastfeeding coalition or the Pennsylvania Breastfeeding Coalition.
And we will be posting these slides on our website if you want to later get that link.
Simple accommodations are critical for employees' breastfeeding success. So a nursing mother has a physical need to remove milk from the breast at regular intervals. You can think of this in terms of manufacturing. Making milk is a supply and demand system. For her, failure to remove milk by breastfeeding or breast pumping can result in painfully full breasts, leaking milk, and infection. Eventually, this will lead to a permanent loss of her milk supply. As the baby grows, especially beyond 6 months, a mother's need to pump typically decreases. And although it's not required by law, flexibility helps women to return to work earlier. A shortened first work week allows both mother and the business to figure things out, merging work requirements with employee needs. And maybe that would be split shifts or even telecommuting. Adjusting the work schedule makes that transition back to the job that much easier. So that reasonable break time we already talked about as being 3 times a day, especially for an infant. And the amount of time that it takes to express milk would be 15 to 20 minutes by the time she gets to the room, sets up the equipment, takes it back down, stores the milk. It could use an hour in a work day. Management is going to set the example of support for other employees. So if coworkers are resistant to this break, you can provide education about this employee benefit and remind them that it's predictable for pumping breaks and you can plan coverage, but unscheduled absences are unpredictable. The law does not require costly building changes, so temporary spaces are acceptable and privacy is the key. This is a list of the minimal requirements, and many employers will provide much more. Some even will provide pumping equipment. Next slide, please. As Kelly mentioned, it can't be a bathroom because this isn't a sanitary place to prepare food, especially for a baby. This paramedic was stationed at a firehouse and was pumping in this bathroom before she spoke to her supervisor about her need. Employees hesitate to ask for space or time, so employers are unaware of their needs. Together with her manager, they came up with a solution to find a private place, and by having her use to pump in an equipment storage area, she was able to continue to breastfeed, and her coworkers made a sign for her to put on the door when she needed privacy to pump. Oftentimes, offices will have a lot of windows, so hanging blinds or frosting the glass or even just putting a sheet over the window when the employee needs to pump will provide that privacy. For employees that might be in the field, out in a vehicle traveling, they could use a sunscreen in the windshield to have some privacy there. You can use existing offices or rooms, and some businesses will share a space. So they maybe a shopping plaza would have one location for all the businesses in that plaza to share. Next slide, please. This was a employee pumping room that we were setting up that actually started out as a storage room. Equipment was moved out, the room was cleaned, and part of the room needed to remain as storage. So we used some furniture, some storage cabinets to create a wall, and to make it look nice, we hung a curtain rod and a curtain, so we made like a faux window. The screen that you see there was used because this space was for two mothers, and that would create privacy within the space. This is an example of an employee break area in Montoursville. River Valley Financial Advisors, which is an independent firm, had a breastfeeding employee, and what the owner did was open his office for employees to eat lunch, and then the employee that was pumping was able to use this space. And this is what she said: "I had a serious goal of wanting to breastfeed my son for a year. Because my employer provided me with a private, spacious, and clean area for pumping, I was able to successfully breastfeed my son for as long as I wanted to." So employer support allowed this employee to reach her personal breastfeeding goal. Because breast pumps are electric, electrical outlet is important, and hands need to be washed and equipment needs to be cleaned, so the running water close by is pretty essential. If you have disinfectant wipes available in the space, then the employees can take responsibility for a bit of the cleaning, and she will have equipment, her pump, that needs to be stored, and the milk will need to be stored in cool storage, whether that's a refrigerator or she brings a cooler herself for the milk. A written policy communicated to current employees and new employees during orientation is also really helpful to define the program. So a mother's decision about breastfeeding is a very personal decision affecting her health and the baby's health. As an employer, you play an important role in the success of mothers who want to breastfeed. Employee lactation programs improve the health of 2 generations. And since today's infants will become tomorrow's workforce, support of their optimal nutrition secures our economic future. Thank you.
Now here is some contact information for Lisa McCloskey, who we said is with the Pennsylvania Breastfeeding Coalition, and we also have contact information for Kelly Kaufman. I will be posting these slides for you on the nfib.com/Pennsylvania webpage. And I want to thank you so much to our presenters and all of those who attended. If you have any further questions, feel free to call NFIB Pennsylvania at any time. Take care, and thank you.